Without organizational standing, quite literally today, we would be in the Stone Ages in terms of fighting housing discrimination. We'd be caught in individual cases of discrimination, one after the other, without ever necessarily getting to the underlying pattern that caused so many injuries to so many people.
Paul Coles was simply an African-American man looking for an apartment who was outraged, as he should have been, when he was told there were none available. And he knew in this particular apartment complex there were apartments. That kind of outrage, quiet, subtly stated, moved him in the direction that sent home in the direction of the Havens case.
The only way you could show what was actually going on with discrimination was to send out some testers. You send a black person out to see if they're going to be given the same information that a white person would be given. The home did that.
Sylvia Coleman and I were the two testers. She was the black tester, I was the white tester.
They presented themselves in all ways to have the same qualifications, background, financial resources, interests, except for their race. That was the one difference between them.
What happened most of the time to me is that I was allowed to rent an apartment. Sure, we have plenty of vacancies. What happened way too often to the black testers, though, is they would say, "I'm sorry, there are no apartments available right now." That was the standard enrichment in white neighborhoods.
I distinctly remember talking to Sylvia Coleman. She would tell me, I know why I'm doing this, I know how it's going to come out, and when Kent and I get together afterwards, and we compare notes, and I just see how stark it is. It hurts. I know it's coming, and it's always surprising, and it always hurts. Barbara Wurtzel was the executive director.
It was Barbara who was really looking at the data and analyzing it, and it was Barbara who was conferring with lawyers about how to push the law forward.
So we filed a complaint in January of '79.
The initial outcome in federal district court was that home didn't have standing and that testers didn't have standing.
We immediately appealed. That same year, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reverses the trial court and says, oh no, home and the testers do have standing, the case should go forward. So we thought of it as a very important issue of enforcement of the civil rights law and of access to the courts more broadly. And at that point, we realized this case could have a real impact, and it has. Preparing was challenging, but also very exhilarating. We had a short period of time to do it.
We were in court, and there was a fair housing organization involved, and there were testers involved. And the idea was to push forward the notion that they were aggrieved parties. No one else had done this before. Somewhere along the line, someone had a good sense that once this Supreme Court got a hold of this issue, that they would rule in our favor. And they did. The impact of the Havens case was widespread and immediate.
As soon as the Supreme Court opinion came down, the media picked up on it. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the newspapers in Richmond. People immediately understood the importance of what the Supreme Court had decided and the impact that it would have.
Havens was groundbreaking. Hundreds of fair housing groups, hundreds of private lawyers doing fair housing enforcement work cite Havens day in and day out in complaints that they file involving the Fair Housing Act.
We want to explain to the court why the Supreme Court said that the National Fair Housing Alliance has standing under the law in order to address a particular issue.
The importance of home standing is that an organization like Home has the continued interest and the resources to bring these cases to court, whereas a particular individual, even though he or she has been the victim of discrimination, might not know about it, might not have the resources to bring the lawsuit, and frankly, people just want to get on with their lives. They're not necessarily trying to make a federal case out of it. He wanted an apartment. He didn't want a lawsuit, but Home was very interested in making sure that the fair housing laws were being complied with because it impacted the work that they were doing. It was important for Home. It was important for other fair housing organizations across the country, many of whom filed amicus briefs, as well as the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and other civil rights organizations all came to support us before the Supreme Court.
Havens said, as soon as an organization has a real and genuine stake in the outcome of the matter, when they've diverted their resources to investigate, when their mission has been impaired or frustrated by the underlying discrimination, that organization could then go into court and challenge the underlying practice. And in Havens, it was quite literally steering white testers in one direction and black testers in another. It was a revolutionary case in 1983 because it said not only is testing an appropriate mechanism, but it is, in fact, the basis for you to get into court and to stay in court to try to undo the discriminatory practice.
We have been involved in cases where individual people have been knocked out of the case for some reason or another. The adjudicator said, you don't have standing. But the organization was left in the case. And so the organization was the only entity left in the game to fight on to expand equal housing opportunities.
Before Havens, if you tested and you saw there was discrimination, there was nothing you could do but know that it existed unless you had a bona fide person like Paul Coles having gone to the same place, and gave it a whole new significance, because now you could send out testers alone and those testers could bring cases. But also the organizational standing. If organizations could file fair housing lawsuits and claim that they or their mission was deterred by discrimination, then they could move cases forward. There was a whole new world that opened up because fair housing organizations had standing as well.
To be able to identify disparate treatment that translates to race or sex or national origin or religion, whatever the basis is, it's a very important thing to be able to do, to bring these cases to the courts. That's why testing is important, and that's why the work of an organization like HOME is so critical.
Housing instability makes every other dream that everybody has impossible. If a person can't live where she wants to live because of a discriminatory reason, she may be caught in a place that doesn't have access to good schools, or to good jobs, or quite frankly to full-service grocery stores, or to banks, or to all of the other amenities that make our lives worthwhile, allow us and our children to be successful. HOME and the other private fair housing groups around the country are vital to ensuring that kind of fair housing choice. The choice of where we live has to be protected, has to be enforced. And only through the vigorous enforcement by private fair housing groups like HOME will we actually get to the promised land.